morning, everyone. I am David Valdez, and I'll be presenting on academic self-efficacy, stress coping, and academic performance in regards to first generation and non-first generation college students. I chose this topic because junior year I've learned about the subject self-efficacy, and ever since then I found it interesting. And as well, I relate in terms of being a first generation college student. So having an interest and being able to relate pushed me towards to doing more research, and actually the more I found, the more interested I got into it. So this led to me choosing this topic. So the underlying theory is is the theory of self-efficacy. Bandura defined self-efficacy in 1977. He defined it as an individual's confidence in their ability to organize and execute a given course of action to solve a problem or accomplish a task. Since then, there has been much research done on the subject, although it's still fairly new. The research is still there's a good amount of research out there, and researchers have found that although someone could be self-efficacious in one area, they may feel incompetent in others. So meaning someone can feel confident in their ability to assemble something together, but when it comes to taking a test or preparing for an exam, they may feel that they don't have those abilities. So that then led researchers to further look into self-efficacy and develop specific kinds of self-efficacy. I have this. I focused on academic self-efficacy. It is rooted within the self-efficacy theory, and it is referred as to an individual's belief that they can successfully achieve a designated level on an academic task or accomplish a specific goal. So I'll be looking at, I already said this. So why I think this is important. I think it is important in order to understand why it is that some students succeed in their classes while other students in the same classes do not do as well. Recent research has shown that academic self-efficacy is an indicator of academic achievement. Research has, before I move on, defining first generation student. A first generation student is a student whose parents or guardians have not attained or completed college, so meaning that they're the first students to go into a four-year institution. And that's the difference. And the non-first generation students are those students that have a parent that has attended college. So with that being said, research has shown that there is a gap between academic achievement in regards to first generation and non-first generation students. Right, so what the previous research had actually shown, in a study conducted by McKay and her colleagues, they conducted a study on high school students in the UK, and they examined the relationship between stress and self-efficacy. The results then showed that academic self-efficacy was significantly associated with stress. So meaning that higher levels of academic self-efficacy, the student had then that predicted was negatively associated with the stress. So if they were confident in their abilities in the academic setting, then the stress they experienced was lower, and vice versa. If they had low academic self-efficacy, then they had higher levels of stress. However, this study only focused in high school students and didn't look at generation and non-first generation students. So in another study by Ramos, Sanchez, and Nicolas, in their study, they focused on the differences between self-efficacy in first generation and non-first generation college students, and their results showed that the level of self-efficacy reported by non-first generation college students was higher than that of the level of self-efficacy reported by non-first generation students was higher than that of first generation college students. So what this means is there's a difference between self-efficacy in regards to generational status. So with that being said, the goal for the current study is to observe college students' experience of self-efficacy in regards stress coping, and academic performance. And the current study also aims to look at the differences between generation regarding these three variables: self-efficacy, academic self-efficacy, stress coping, and academic performance. So that then leads to my hypothesis. had two hypotheses. The first hypothesis predicted that academic self-efficacy and stress coping are positively related to academic performance. In this case, academic performance was a student's GPA. I'll go a little bit more in depth in that. The second hypothesis was that it was predicted that first generation college students will have lower academic self-efficacy, lower stress coping, and lower academic performance in regards when being compared to non-first generation college students. So looking at the participant, there was 105 MCU graduate students. The ages ranged from 18 to 30. On average, most of the participants were 20. When looking at gender breakdown, 60% were females and 40% were males. And looking at class standing, the majority was freshmen with 44.6%, followed by sophomores and juniors, which were at 20.8%, and the least were seniors, but with 13.9%. When looking at ethnic breakdown, the majority of them were Hispanic with 37%, followed by Caucasian or white, which was 26%, and then followed by Asian 15.2%, African American 7.6%, and 1% identified as being Native American. And then when looking at generational status, 48.6% identified as being first generation college students, and 50.5% said they were non-generation college students. And then students were recruited based on convenience sampling, meaning that I went into studying classes and only those students that were in those classes were able to take the study. So the materials. So the survey consisted of academic performance, which was the student's self-reported GPA. Generation status, students said whether or not they were first generation or not first generation students. And then I used the academic self-efficacy, which looked at students' confidence and their ability on how well they perform tasks in an academic setting. This was consisted of 27 items. Example questions were doing well in my toughest class and doing well in exams. The scale was 1 from 0, 0 being not confident at all, and 10 being extremely confident. In order to look at stress, I used the brief Cope inventory subscale that consisted of 28 items and had 14 categories. So each of the 2 questions out of the 28 were paired to make the 14 categories. This was on a scale from 1 through 4, 4 being that I have not experienced this at all, and 4 being I've been doing this a lot when the students were found in stressful situations. And then, like I said, the categories were broken down into 14 different subcategories. And an example, for example, active coping, a question was, I've been taking action to try and make the situation better. And when looking at acceptance, I've been accepting the reality of the fact that it has happened, and emotional support, that the student has been getting emotional support either from peers or friends when found in stressful situations. So the procedure, when I went into the classes, I gave a brief introduction of the study, let them know what it was about, as well as a consent form was administered to the students, letting them know that it was completely voluntarily, and then at any point, if they wished to stop, they could, and it wouldn't affect them in no way. Once that was completed and signed, they received the survey, and it took the students about 5 to 7 minutes to complete. And then afterwards, students turned in their surveys, came up and turned in their surveys facing down in order to maintain confidentiality and keep it anonymous. And in the survey, there was also no line or place for the students to write their name or to be identified to their survey. Once they did that, a debriefing form was given to them that had more information regarding the study, as well as a contact number for them to contact if they had any questions at a later time. So looking at the overall descriptives, which means the overall sample, on average, students' academic self-efficacy from 0 being not confident at all and 10 being confident at all, they were closer to the being confident, so that on 0 to 10 they were a 6. In regards to academic performance, again, this was their GPA. Students reported to have a 3.2, so it's like a B average, and that ranged from give or take 0.45. And the stress coping categories, it's a little bit overwhelming, but looking only at the highest ones, when students found in stressful situations, they often refer to active coping, so doing something about the stressful situation. Another high one was planning. So when students were found in stressful situations, they took planning in terms of helping with the stressful situation. And the low ones were, when found in stressful situations, students strayed away from substance use and denial. So this is the relationship between academic self-efficacy and GPA. There was a moderate positive relationship between academic self-efficacy and GPA. So meaning the higher levels of self-efficacy a student had, the higher the GPA was. So when looking at stress and coping, not all of them were significant, but these were significant, meaning that denial, self-blame, and behavior disengagement had a negative relationship with GPA. So the more the students denied their stressful situations, blame themselves about the stressful situations, and did not do anything to do something about the stressful situation, then their GPA was lower. So when looking at first generation and non-first generation students, in regards to academic self-efficacy, these it showed that first generation students had slightly lower level of self-efficacy, and first generation were slightly higher. However, this was not statistically significant, but it does agree with the research that has been found. And when looking at academic performance, this is where it's kind of a twist. Previous study has shown that non-first generation students have a higher GPA than first generation students, but in this sample, first generation students had a slightly higher GPA than non-first generation college students. However, this was not statistically significant, but it was an interesting finding. And then this is a little bit overwhelming. However, it just goes to show that when taking into consideration all 14 stress coping categories, first generation students and non-first generation students did not differ in levels, so meaning the way in which students, the overall sample first generation and first generation and non-first generation students handle stressful situations were very similar. So in summary, to restate my hypothesis, the first hypothesis, academic self-efficacy and stress are positively related to academic performance. That was supported. Academic self-efficacy was related to certain coping strategy, as well as GPA was related to specific coping strategies. However, the second hypothesis was not supported, which reads first generation college students will have a lower academic self-efficacy, stress coping, academic performance in comparison to non-first generation students. However, that's not all bad. That just goes to show that here, at least in Marymount, first generation and non-first generation students perform the same in regards to these three variables: in their confidence, in their stress coping abilities, and their academic performance, which is their overall GPA. So some limitations that were found in my study could have been with the participants. The sample was only MCU students. However, again, convenient sampling meant that I only went to specific classes, so it wasn't open to all students. And even then, I also did conduct the study in the library, so students that were there, but that's also convenient sampling because not every student at NCU goes to the library, so it wasn't pretty fair. So those findings then cannot be applied to the overall Marymount population. And then another thing is that the length of the survey could have been a little bit too long. I had two scales, the academic subscale and coping subscale, and those each had 28 questions, so students could have felt overwhelmed, as well as they could have felt that it was a bit overwhelming. The reason I say it was overwhelming is some students filled up to like question 10 and left everything blank, or just filled out the same for everything else. As well as clarity, some questions could have been confusing for the students, so some of the questions in the items were left blank. So for future research, I would suggest researchers to look at the complete academic self-efficacy scale rather than using the subscale, and using the full stress coping scale rather than using the subscale. And this will then ensure validity and reliability, because when having categories and only having two questions, if a student didn't answer one or two, then that meant that category wasn't invalid. But if we use the full scales, each of them had consisted of, at least for academic self-efficacy, consisted of 4 questions, so that's a better average in order to look at that scale. And then in regards to academic self-efficacy, rather than looking at the overall academic experience, focus how the student performs in regards to math or English, and see if there's differences amongst that. And then focus on a more specific sample. I focused on overall, my sample consisted of overall students, and the majority, I didn't focus necessarily only on, I didn't necessarily focus just on freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. It was done overall. So probably that could have affected the results in regards to that. There probably could have been differences in regards to class standing, and such as like when a freshman comes in, and as opposed to how those levels are compared. Those two variables then are measured being an upperclassman, either junior or senior. So like I said, focus on a specific class standing rather than looking at overall. So the take-home message. Anyway, so when students have in order for students to succeed academically, they have high academic self-efficacy and high stress coping skills. Meaning that when these students are faced with challenges, they're most likely to try. They're most likely to have the ability and the confidence. They know that they will overcome this challenge, as opposed to having low self-efficacy and as opposed to having low confidence and low stress coping skills. The student might just find those challenges really overwhelming, and they will then be set back and be not want to overcome them. So, for example, when a student does bad in a quiz, a student with high self-efficacy will then just know that their abilities for that exam was not as well, but then in future exams or quizzes, they know that they do have the ability to perform obtain a better grade, or not fail it, as opposed to someone that has low academic self-efficacy. If they do bad, then they would just focus solely on the fact that they did bad, and then believe that in future tests or exams they will not be able to do better. And then students with high academic self-efficacy again are shown to overcome challenges and handle them better. And then as well, when students are faced with having low academic self-efficacy, rather than just giving tutoring for them, also offer techniques and services that help increase their academic self-efficacy. So help increase their confidence and their ability to and their knowledge for them to know that they have the skills, what it takes in order to do well in an academic setting. So whether it's taking notes and knowing that once they get out of their class, they could apply what they've known in those lecture notes and apply it, and know that they could then be useful for taking a quiz and taking an exam. And that's my presentation.
Questions for David? You're trying to say something, Eric? Or no, maybe not. No? Okay. I actually had a question, David. So you brought up a really good point that your results didn't necessarily align with prior research that has found differences between first gens and non-first gens. So what do you think is, and this is totally speculation, right? But what do you think can help explain this? Like, what's specific about a small liberal arts college that might, close this gap between, differences?
At least in Marymount, we have that relationship where the ratio from student to professors is a lot smaller in comparison to bigger institutions. It's like hundreds of students, and they don't necessarily are able to meet with professors, so they don't get that attention. And with self-efficacy, in order to, one of the ways to increase self-efficacy is by showing verbal appraisal to the students, so showing and telling them that they can do it, and as well as vicarious experience. So when a student goes into an office hours and they see that someone else or the professor is able to do the problem, for example, then that may also influence the student's ability to do to know that they can do it as well, as opposed to when it's a whole bunch of students and TAs, it's overwhelming at other institutions. And then as well, the studies I looked at included a larger sample, and they also included other institutions, as opposed to the one I focused on was that small private liberal arts college. So to answer the question, overall I feel like the sample size and relationship with professors and students and the research that they have affects that.
Just trying to probe you for your discussion, because that kind of opens up for another line of research about the benefits of a small liberal arts college. There's stuff out there that, that explains that first-gen students do tend to excel more in these kind of small settings. Just future stuff for your discussion. Other questions for David? Beautiful, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Griselda Barahona, and today I will be presenting on bullying among high school students. Just to give you guys a quick overview of a bullying incident.
Is being held this morning in Florida for Rebecca Sedgwick. The sixth grader committed suicide last week. Authorities say she suffered nearly a year of cyberbullying. As Michelle Miller reports, more than a dozen of her classmates could be held responsible.
So just to give you guys a quick overview, Rebecca Sedgwick was a victim of bullying for quite a long time. Her mother tried to take the initiative to take her out of the school that she was in. However, that didn't work so well because the girls that were attacking her still managed to get a hold of her through social media. Rebecca Sedgwick decided to go to an abandoned concrete building and climb all the way to the top and kill herself, just because of all the attacks that were being pressed to her by her fellow peers. To give you guys a quick statistics based on the Los Angeles Unified School District, there are currently 900 schools within the district. There is $225,000 funding money given to the schools in order to create prevention programs. According to the National Center of Bullying, there are 4 methods of bullying, which are verbal bullying, which consists of teasing. Physical bullying consists of hitting someone. Hidden bullying consists of damaging someone's self-image by creating rumors. And also cyberbullying, which, as we just saw, a clear example is through the use of social media. According to a study in 2014, the LAUSD believes that bullying is only a problem that's only increasing throughout the years. Long-term consequences. Willard and Brouch believe that physical bullying is related to having emotional problems. Some long-term effects are considered to be suicidal behavior, substance abuse, and low self-esteem. As we just saw with Rebecca, she had a problem with low self-esteem levels and also suicidal behavior. Unfortunately, her suicidal behavior wasn't only a behavior, it was something that she actually went forward and committed because she couldn't handle all the pressure of the attacks that she was receiving. According to Seals and Young, they believe that the higher bullying encounters that there are, children have a lower self-esteem level. They believe that victims of bullying have more of an aggression. This is because the victims have so much anger built within themselves that they do not know how to react accordingly to others. Having a simple conversation with someone could result with them remembering what happened and then have an aggressive behavior towards the person. They also believe that girls are more likely to be bully victims than boys. So why is this important? As mentioned before, bullying is an ongoing problem. There are many effects of them. Just to give you guys a quick overview, I was a victim of bullying back in middle school. I was perhaps attacked by a group of 10 girls continually, like every day kind of thing. My parents always told me, don't confront them, do what you have to do, go tell someone. I would do so, and the dean, principals, assistant principals never did anything. The one time that I decided to defend myself was the one time that they were like, you know what, you're causing too many problems, I think you should go to a different school. My mom was like, you know what, that's fine. I don't want my daughter to be in a place where her livelihood, where she spends a good amount of hours, to be affected by the pressure of other girls. So my mom was like, perfect. After that, this goes back to Seals and Young with the aggression. I did have an aggression because I believe, why is it that me being the victim and being kicked out, leaving the friends that I had there because of the attacks of other people? I told them that made no sense, but fine, it's okay. Therefore, I arrived to 2 hypotheses. The first one being that higher levels that are reported of bullying will be related to lower self-esteem levels. The second one is that girls will have higher levels, or report to have higher levels of bullying compared to boys. My participants. So I had 63 high school students, 65% of them were females, 33% were male, and 2% did not want to identify themselves. I had an average age of 16 years old. I had 22% 9th graders, 8% 10th graders, 25 11th, and 45 being 12. I decided to go back to my high school back in Los Angeles. I spoke to the principal and I told her, I want to do a study on bullying within your school. She said, that's perfect, I'm all for it. What do you need? How can I help you? And I told her, plain and simple, I need 1 class 9th grade, 1 10th, 1 11th, and 1 12th grade. My population, majority of them is responding to being from a Latin Hispanic background. reported saying that they were American. Being as I know what the population is, I believe the participant wanted to identify themselves as Mexican American, but I had no way to identify them, so I said, okay, 2% American works. And there was no compensation given. My materials. So I used a Likert scale survey using a scale of 1 through 5, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree. I wanted to sample or to have variables on physical bullying, social bullying, self-esteem, trust, and effects. 5 of my questions were for physical bullying. An example would be someone tries to fight me often. 5 of them were in regards to social bullying. One of the questions saying, I've heard rumors about me. 5 questions were about self-esteem. I have a positive image towards myself. 3, in regards to trust, I don't trust anyone. And 5, for effects, bullying has hurt me. My procedure. Seeing as my participants were underage, I needed to get permission from the parents. So before sending out consent forms, I wanted to give the parents an overview of who I am. Explain to them I'm an alumni from the school. Here's what I want to focus on. Do you guys give me permission? I gave the students the consent forms and the letters 2 weeks in advance. They returned them back to me. I went to the 9th grade class, 10th grade class, 11th grade class, and 12th grade class. The students took an average of 10 minutes. I gave them a quick overview once the survey was done of what I wanted to find, and they were just like, okay, that works. And no questions for me, and I went on to talk to the principal to see whether or not there's something that we could do. My overall statistics. Based on the Likert scale from 1 to 5, there was a mean of 1.5 for physical bullying, a mean of 1.8 for social bullying, a mean of 3.6 for self-esteem, a mean of 2.3 for trust, and a 2.1 mean for the effects. Here we're able to see a scatter plot on bullying and self-esteem. This right here is for social bullying. The one on the other side is for physical aggression, in other words, physical bullying as well. We're able to see that there is a negative correlation for both of the bullies. So as the more bullying there's reported, the lower self-esteem the children are encountering. We're able to see right here and right there. For bullying and effects, on physical aggression, we're able to see there was a negative correlation, and for social bullying, we're able to see there was a positive. So over here, for the social and effects, we're able to see that they're both meeting the same direction. However, for physical aggression and effects, we're able to see that physical aggression is going up and the effects are going down. In regards to my hypothesis number 2, just remember that I wanted to test whether or not girls report to be more victims of bullying than to boys. However, there was no gender difference between social bullying, physical bullying, and self-esteem. They all seem to go hand in hand right there. So overall, what does this mean? Overall, there are 2 different types of bullying, one being physical and one being social. Bullying affects the self-esteem of the children. As we saw in a couple slides ago, as one person continues to experience bullying, they have a lower self-esteem. So, in quick words, hypothesis number 1 was supported, hypothesis number 2 was not. So bullying is a very important topic since we see that as the years go by, it continues to grow and grow and grow. I don't, being as I have perhaps 5 nephews, 2 nieces, seeing this kind of don't like that because, I don't think anyone who has children in their family to be a victim of bullying and to see the ugly side that society itself has. In the future, what we're able to do is to have a greater variation of gender. Let's recall that majority of my population was based on females, and I had just perhaps a couple of male students who responded to the surveys. Have a variation within the ethnicities. Again, I went to a school that's majority Latin, Hispanic background. Have a variation between self-esteem and trust. I'm able to have one certain idea of self-esteem. You might have a different one. I might have a certain idea of what trust is. You might have another one. So in a way, categorize both self-esteem and trust into two different categories to see how the children perceive what self-esteem is and how trust is. Also do the testing in different schools. I focused in Los Angeles because that's where I'm from. The high school that I went to, I knew they were going to be all for it with helping me out in order to help me graduate. And perhaps doing the testings in Carson, Torrance, San Pedro, Santa Monica, back another school in Los Angeles, we're able to see some sort of a variation to see if we find something different. So overall, 63 children responded to being a victim of bullying. That is 100% of my participants responding to being a victim of bullying. There are no prevention programs in the high school that I went to. I believe in order to look towards the future, we all say children are our future. We all say we have to do everything to help the children to have a good nutrition, to make sure they do well in school, to hopefully put them onto the right path to become college alumni one day. But what does that all matter if they have a bad self-image of themselves, if they are constantly attacked within their schools? For example, someone could say, well, I'm not good enough just because they have such a low self-esteem level. Why am I going to go to college? I'm not going to do anything for my future. I believe that it all has to start with creating some sort of prevention program. A prevention program where the children know what it is, children know what to do if they are a victim of bullying, to make sure the faculty members know what to do if they see a child being victim of bullying, but most importantly, to make sure that the parents know what bullying is and what to do to prevent it. I mean, my parents would always assume that my child is in the school, she's in a safe place. I'm going to work, I could go off thinking they'll be fine. They'll be like, okay, are you doing good in school? Perfect, problem solved. But when the bullying happened to me, they were just like, no. I'd take time off to see what's going on, to make sure the school is focusing on what they have to do, to make sure that my child is doing well, and make sure that she's not going to be a victim ever anytime again. To me, personally, again, being an aunt, beautiful nephews and beautiful nieces, I don't want my nieces or nephews to come to me and tell me I'm being a victim of bullying. I cannot see that, because it's perhaps the most horrible thing one could go to. And most of all, I don't want them to doubt themselves. If we're here and trying to set some sort of a platform for our children, we need to make sure they have the proper education, the proper prevention programs from school to make sure they are no longer a victim of bullying. Thank you.
Questions for Griselda? Yes.
Great topic, and I have two questions.
Sure.
One of them, the first one's on IRB and with LAUSD. Since your human subjects were under 18, of course you had to do IRB through Marymount.
Correct.
Did LAUSD, usually they require a whole IRB process that's separate. How did you
Well, the
navigate
school that I focus on is outside. It's Green Rock Public Schools. They kind of separate themselves from LAUSD. The principal obtained permission from the Green Dot coordinators, and they was like, okay, as long as we get some sort of a response of what was found, we're gonna be okay with it.
And did the parents have to also approve the permission?
Yeah, they did.
Oh, right,
I
okay.
couldn't go ahead and give them the
That's
survey if
right.
I had no parental consent.
I was just curious on that one. The one that I find is one of the hardest aspects of bullying is, of course, in human development, children learning to work out issues with other children is an important problem solving. It's an important part of growing up. But where did you see in your project that you drew the lines between children being children and saying, you know, you stink, well, you're an idiot. You know, those normal things, and I'm not saying they're
No,
always
yeah.
normal, don't get me wrong, because I would prefer never to have words like that.
Right.
So it's easy to define, if I suddenly slap Tammy, that's really easy to define, that that's, you know, and if every time I saw her, I hit her, I punched her, I pull her hair, that's really pretty obvious.
Right.
If you post something mean on social media, that's pretty obvious. But when it comes to those words,
Well, I also had open-ended questions for the students,
Okay.
and I gave them clear examples, as in being like physically like hit, like punching, kicking.
right,
You know, I believe that more for elementary and for middle schoolers, they have a broader idea of what that might be. So they might
Right.
see like the simple tap as, oh, okay, we're just joking around, versus high schoolers. So I wanted to focus more on children who are kind of more developed between finding the separation between physical
right,
and just being playful.
uh-huh,
Also for social media, I mean, they have a clear idea of what it is. For example, the principal, when I went in to talk to her, she told me that she's just encountering a bullying problem right now. On Snapchat, some girls telling some other girl, okay, well, you're a bitch, you should
Yes.
die, I hate you,
very obvious.
and certain things like that. And I mean,
Did you use the word hidden for one of your 5 types of bullying? One of them was,
it was based on the National Center of Bullying, where they believe that there's 4 types of bullying. I didn't tell the children anything about hitting or anything. I just generalized to physical and social,
okay,
and then versus verbal. One can see verbal and hidden bullying as 2 together, because you're
I
still
see.
using verbal attacks to hurt someone's
I
image.
understand. Thank you.
Griselda, would you have parents be a part of your prevention program?
Yes, actually, one point that I didn't point out was that the closest program here, remember, LAUSD says that they provide $225,000 for funding. However, the closest school that I found for prevention of programs was all the way in Santa Monica. So to me, it's just like, where's the money? Like, if you're saying that you're providing X, Y amount of money, why isn't that the school that I'm working in has a prevention program? The school nearby, that's LAUSD, doesn't have a prevention program. Over in Santa Monica, they have parents, teachers, and children involved. They, for the children, for example, they have them have a quick overview, like what bullying is, make sure they know what to do. Faculty members, they have to be on top of them. Like the first minute they see a bullying act, they have to report it to the principal. Principal has to lead the pursuit that they have to do. Parents are involved by teaching them what bullying is, the different types of bullying, what to do if they're home, and then they see their children just, I mean, nowadays, kids just want to be on the internet. So parents think, oh boy, it's okay. But it's not okay, because we don't know to the extent of what the children are doing within social media. For all we know, some older person could be talking to them, and that's not good. But among the peers also, they start attacking each other. And another point, my parents, that's one thing that I do love about them, was that they were always on top of us. Like, all right, you guys want to be, to my brother and I, you guys want to be on the internet? That's fine. You have X, Y amount of time to be on the internet, and I want to see what you're doing all times. If you come and I come over here and if you're covering the screen, your time on the computer is done. And that's how they work. And they try, they can't be with me all the time. When I was in middle school, and it was like, my mom was like, you know what, that's fine, take her out. She doesn't need this school. And I mean, ever since then, they were just like, oh, she's not gonna have a good education without us. here I am graduating with honors, so I was like, yeah, I think so. So, yeah.
Do they know sometimes when, because you're a beautiful woman, and
you.
so you're not the typical, you know, it's not like, if it's on Criminal Minds or it's on,
Right.
you know, some TV show, it's always the person who is just, either they have a physical disability of some sort, they're overweight or whatever.
Yeah.
What, is there any, did you run across any studies about what do people target in against one person that
Well-
then makes this collective, we're all gonna pick on it?
Well, majority of when I the open-ended questions I ask, well, what types of bullying have you experienced? Many of them say, well, I've been name called, I'm fat, I'm ugly, about sexual orientation.
Okay.
It was just like an ongoing thing. I guess nowadays high schoolers, they see, a certain image of what society thinks is beautiful, and they have that stuck in their mind. And so if I'm here and some other person's here who doesn't look like me, we're like, oh, well, she's too ugly and stuff like that. And then this is where the problems start. This is where the victim starts thinking, well, I'm not good enough. Like I have to look like her in order to be considered beautiful. And that to me should also start like for the prevention of programs to help the children have a better self-esteem levels of themselves, to think that they don't have to look like a cover magazine person to find themselves beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank
That's-
you.
Hello everyone, my name is Hilda Sapinian and welcome to my capstone. So my capstone is about divorce and beliefs in marriage. So, what is divorce? According to the English dictionary, it means the legal dissolution of a marriage or of one's marriage. Well, for me, it's people falling out of love. So, the divorce rate of America for first marriages is 41%, according to divorcestatistics.org. A child's first teacher is their parent. So, children look up to their parents and are aware of their surroundings and tend to carry their parents' beliefs. And my topic is important because it can help parents so they can keep in mind or be aware in how divorce affects the children. Existing research. So, some of the existing research had divorce can lead to consequences through generations. That was an article that I read from Amato and Jacob. Another one was that children of divorced marriages did in fact not trust commitment and carefully chose their spouse before entering in marriage. Some of the gaps in research were all college students' ethnicity. Some research articles that I searched up only tend to focus on African Americans or people who are Hispanic, but not of all ethnicity. And also for both genders, one study that I saw was that they did a gender on female college students only. So my capstone, my research will be addressed in my study because I have both participants, both men and female, and of all ethnicity. My hypothesis and research question. So, my research question is, does divorce and family origin influences beliefs in marriage? It is predicted that if divorce is in family origin, it is most likely that it will influence beliefs that marriage doesn't last forever. And mythology. So I recruited 50 Marymount students. 50% were both male and female, from ages 18 to 29. The ethnic breakdown was that 20% were Caucasian, 5% were Asian, and 5% were Hispanic. Some of the most popular majors were business, psychology, film, liberal arts, and pre-med. The participant, like I said, they were recruited at Psychology Research Day and a sports psychology class. Materials. A survey was used to measure the parental marital status, which was coded into 2 categories based on having experienced divorce, separation, or not. So my survey had 29 questions and a Likert scale of 1 to 3. from 1 being true to 2 being sort of true and 3 being false. So some questions were about beliefs about marriage. Like an example is, I see myself getting married one day, choosing true, sort of true, or false. The other questions were the extent of healthiness of their parental marital status. Like, I never saw my parents arguing, or my parents are happy together. Also, another one was current use of the relationship. For example, do you prefer being in a committed relationship than a fling? And the survey was to find correlation between parental marital status and beliefs in marriage. The procedure. So the students came by my booth on Psychology Research Day, and they were asked to take a survey. They were given the informed consent first, and they had to read it carefully and sign it. Once they finished signing it, they were given a pencil and pen, and they had to complete the survey. It took them about 10 to 15 minutes. And after they completed the survey, they were debriefed for about 5 minutes. These were my results. So the divorce, 23 participants had experienced divorce in family versus 27 had not. The views on marriage. So like I said, the Likert scale was from 1 to 3. So as you can see, views on marriage, the mode was 2.61. So it leaned mostly into 3, which is false. And view on current relationship was also the mode was 2.31, and the healthiness score was 1.95. As you can see, it leaned toward more to being not. The healthiness score leaned more to being true that their parents did had a healthy relationship, so their current views were more healthier as well. So this is a chart for divorce and healthiness of relationship. As you can see, the participants who didn't experience divorce or separation, their score was higher as in the healthiness score of what they view as a relationship. As well as divorce and separation, people who experience divorce and separation see that they experienced less on the healthiness score. This is another divorce and current views on marriage and relationships. As you can see also, people who have not experienced divorce or separation within their parents, they score higher on views of marriage. So they do see themselves eventually getting married or being in a committed relationship. Despite as also from divorce and separation, they've experienced that they don't view marriage as well due to having experienced divorce or separation in their family unit. This is another data that I discovered was parents' relationship, healthiness, and current views on marriage and relationship. As you can see, it's all over, but you could tell from this is current views and this is parent score. So it goes positive like this. So their current views do match of how their parents scored healthy. So being that their parents' relationship is healthy, their current views are higher because they've experienced a healthy family unit as well. While in this one, the marriage mean and parent score, this is their beliefs of if they see themselves actually getting married. And as you can see also, it's positive, meaning that the parent score, if their parents' score was higher as a healthy, they also believe that marriage is, for them, will be healthy as well. And the summary is participants who had experienced divorce and separation in the home had significantly lower views on marriage than those who had. Also, the extent of the healthiness of their parents' relationship was positively related to both their views on marriage and on their current relationship. My hypothesis was supported. Some of the limitations of my study was that some participants may not have paid attention while doing my survey and answered very quickly, or some it was a little bit technical in putting their parental status. Some people's parental status was they got separated but then they got back together again, or a parent was deceased, or they were single, like they were just two people who just had a kid together. So it was very difficult trying to put their parental status in a category. And in the future, an idea for future research can be interviewing engaged couples who have divorced parents and see if going into a marriage will be good or scary for them. Another idea can be interviewing divorced couples who have divorced parents and see if their parents have maybe influenced their relationship. And one of the take-home messages that I have is that parents should keep in mind in how divorce affects their children. So that is my capstone. Thank you. Any questions?
So you said on a survey that it categorized whether the relationship was healthy or not.
Mm-hmm.
So you found that it did affect like the relationships, or what exactly? Can you summarize your results?
Yes. So what I found out is technically healthy is whether the parents are together, and if not, experience divorce or separate. So I found out that people who did experience a divorce and relationship did not view marriage well.
Okay.
So they because they saw that growing up, they think, I don't want that to happen to me, so they tend to be more not into marriage or not looking for a committed relationship.
Okay.
Did you find that, you know how there's a stereotype that if you see your parents one way, you try to do the opposite because you've learned from that example? Like, did you see that in your results, or was that just not found, that people who had divorced parents had a really positive look on marriage and like those kind of relationships? Did you find something?
I did find that some, even though their parents were divorced, still had hope for them one day to get married. But they were more likely not. Like if they had divorced parents, they were likely not to be married as well.
Okay.
Yeah, pictured earlier that you examined both the genders and also multiple racial backgrounds. Did you find any gender differences in their beliefs, or any racial differences or ethnic differences? I guess.
I didn't find any gender differences or racial differences. So yeah, that is a good question, but I didn't really went into that specifically. But thank you.
Well done. I was really glad you addressed the difficulty in sort of defining what a marriage is, because in class recently we were talking about marriage, and I asked how many of your parents were divorced in class. In a class of 30, only 3 students raised their hand. I was really shocked about that. And then what I found out was over half the class have parents that were either not ever married or have some non-traditional kind of a thing. So I'm glad you addressed the difficulty of that. I'm curious, did you find in your research any connection related to the age of the child and the divorce and the effect of the age on the outcomes?
I didn't really specifically went into that, but I did notice that some of the divorce happened when they were younger, but they still had it in their mind. You know, they still remember specifically, because I had a question, describe how your parents' relationship was throughout the years growing up, and they told me, like, even if they were divorced, like when they were 3, they still remember specifically how their relationship was, that it was ugly, nasty, abusive, they were better off not being together. But I didn't really specifically went into that. But thank you. Good question. Thank you. Any more questions? No? Thank you.
So, hi, my name is Madison Gavelli, and I did my capstone project on correlations between shame and social support among women with substance use disorders. In the past month, 24.6 million Americans used an illicit drug. In the past year, 76% of young adults consumed alcohol. Illicit drugs and alcohol cost the American healthcare system roughly $36 billion annually. So, past research, women with substance use disorders and treatment. A lot of women see, even though those results for or statistics on drug use are similar among genders and almost equal in many cases, the availability with which women can seek treatment are not equal at all. Women face additional barriers that men don't face. Some of them are shame associated with seeking treatment, being uninformed about treatment options, treatment models that better serve a male population. A lot of the treatment is for males, run by males, and it doesn't really think or talk about women's issues in addiction, and concern about costs and difficulty arranging childcare. This is something that women have to worry about far more than men. They have to worry about who's going to watch their kids and who's going to pay for it while they're away at an IOP treatment center. And then the positive impact of single gender treatment composition. There isn't a lot of single gender treatment composition. A treatment that's available to women is typically mixed gender, and that's not really conducive to a great experience in treatment and positive treatment outcomes. So shame is something that's talked a lot about in the literature of women in recovery, and Brene Brown is kind of a guru in this field, and she made a theory called the shame resilience theory, and it acknowledges personal vulnerabilities, levels of critical awareness. So are they aware of their shame? Do they know what's going on? Reaching out for support. Are these women able to reach out to their peers and their family members and their significant other for help and support in overcoming shame and addiction? And speaking shame. Are they able to talk about their shame? Are they able to give their shame the proper words and vernacular associated with it so that it's clear that they're talking about shame and they're not talking about something else? And she talks, and also associated with substance use disorders and shame is mindfulness and acceptance of shame interlaced with treatment. So Brene Brown's theory of shame is used for all kinds of things like depression, bipolar disorder, all kinds of things in addition to addiction. But this study actually showed how mindfulness and acceptance of shame works for a recovering addict's treatment. And it's really important to note here that the goal of this researcher was not to eliminate shame completely from the recovering addict's life. It was to practice techniques of mindfulness and acceptance. When the addict tries to eliminate shame completely, this researcher found that it actually feeds their addiction and they become obsessed with trying to eliminate shame from their life, when in reality that's not possible. Everyone on this planet has shame, and we all need to work to overcome it, and the addict does as well. So another variable that's highly associated with addiction and substance use disorders is social support. So this research looked at low social support and high social support among individuals with addiction they looked at them when they came into treatment center with no time sober, and then they looked at them 6 months after intake and wanted to see what the effects of low social support and high social support were. What they found is that individuals who had lower social support had a higher incidence of comorbidity with things such as depression and anxiety at the time of intake, so when they came in, and at the 6-month follow-up. Individuals with high social support were predicted to have a significant reduction in drug abuse at the end of their 6-month period of intake, and they were also predicted, or it also showed from this research that high social support was associated with low substance abuse. So the more people had positive, healthy social support in their life, the less likely they were to continue with their substance abuse. So, my hypothesis, based on the current research, I predict that feelings of shame and individuals' perception of social support are related. It seems like there has to be a relationship because social support is so closely tied with feelings of shame, and shame about the addiction that you hurt your family or you weren't able to show up or things like that can affect an individual's social support. So I hypothesize that there is a negative relationship between levels of shame and an individual's perceived social support. I also hypothesize that a difference will emerge among the genders. I think that males will have lower levels of shame overall and higher levels of social support, and the opposite for women. So my study had 29 participants. The average age was 29 years old. 100% of my participants were sober. They had to be sober to participate in this study. The average length of sobriety was 41 and a half months, which is about 3.5 years. All participants in the study attended Alcoholics Anonymous with the exception of one participant. So they were involved in AA, they went to meetings, they had sponsees, they had their own sponsor, and participated in all aspects of Alcoholics Anonymous. In this study, I had a digital questionnaire, and it was comprised of some background questions and 3 variables that were, do you seek additional treatment outside of Alcoholics Anonymous? Have you been prescribed or diagnosed with an additional disorder besides alcoholism or addiction? And do you take any prescribed medication? After the background question, I had the multidimensional scale of perceived social support. This was a scale that had 12 items and a mean of 12 items, and a sample question would be, there's someone around when I'm in need. The internalized shame scale was the latter part of this survey. It had 30 questions, and an example of a question would be, I feel that I have much to be shameful of. So my procedure. All participants received a link to the online survey. Initially, a lot of the surveys were sent by me to people that I know in Alcoholics Anonymous, and then from there, they were sent out to other people that they know in Alcoholics Anonymous, and participants were required to acknowledge the informed consent before proceeding. Then they filled out the background information and answered the 30-item shame scale and 12 items perceived social support scale. Participants were, after it was completed, debriefed, and thanked for their participation. There was no incentive involved with this survey. So here's what I found. First, social support scale and shame scale. The overall mean was a score of 6. It was rated from 1 to 7. So my participants felt like they had a lot of social support. Overall, almost a perfect score. And then shame score, much lower. It was 4.7. So overall, my participants felt like they didn't have much to be shameful of. They were almost neutral. And then here's some other additional things that I looked at. I looked at length of sobriety, and I had about 3.5 years of all my participants. And I also looked at how many of my participants sought additional treatment. 31 did. How many participants had additional disorders? 69%. That could be anything from depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, etc. And prescribed medication, were they taking additional medication? Only 34% did. So my hypothesis wasn't supported. As you can see here, there's really not a high correlation at all between levels of shame and perceived social support. I did, however, look at individuals who had 1 year or less of sobriety, and I did find a relationship. As shame goes up, social support is down. As social support comes up, shame goes down. So there is a negative relationship between shame and social support among individuals who have 1 year or less of sobriety. I also looked at additional treatment against shame. So my individuals, only 31% sought additional treatment, and of those people, they had much lower levels of shame than individuals who did not seek additional treatment outside of Alcoholics Anonymous. So people who are going to group therapy, people who are going to treatment centers, IOPs, OPs, those kinds of things, they're getting the professional help from people that they need to process their shame and deal with real life problems. I also looked at individual questions on my shame part of the survey, and all of these things were significant. So An example is, I'm fundamentally defective as a person. Males were more likely to be shameful about this than women were. These were really the only gender differences that I found in the study at all. Everything else was pretty universal for men and for women. Conclusion. So my overall sample did not support my hypothesis. However, my hypothesis was supported among individuals who had 1 year or less of sobriety. Individuals who are sober are not feeling exceptionally high levels of shame, and they're feeling supported by their friends, family, and significant other. All three of those groups were addressed in the perceived social support. This was true for both genders. We didn't see much variation between genders, with the exception of specific questions that were asked. And individuals with 1 year or less of sobriety do show a negative relationship between shame and social support. My additional findings. So individuals who sought additional treatment maintain lower levels of shame. Overall, individuals who seek additional treatment are getting more help in processing their shame by professionals and by other people in the program who have longer sobriety than the individual. And out of this sample, only one male sought out additional treatment. So of those 31% who were seeking additional treatment, only one of them was male and the rest were female. Males were more likely to be shameful about themselves. They were answering questions like, I feel fundamentally defective as a person. I can't control my body and my feelings, whereas women were more shameful about themselves in relation to other people. So they were talking about feeling shameful that others were going to see their shame and their defects, and they were talking about loneliness and things like that, that they felt isolated, which is very consistent with the literature where men tend to drink in social settings and women tend to drink in isolation. You can kind of see that in the specific questions that they answered of things that they were shameful about. So the limitations. I had a very small sample size. I would love to have gotten much more people in this sample and looked at a lot of people who had less than 1 year. Of my participants, a very small number of them had less than a year. And there was limited diversity among participants. These people who participated in this survey were friends of mine and friends of my friends, and I think because of that there was a limitation in how much diversity was in the study. Individuals with low sobriety need additional support to help process their shame. So individuals who are coming into Alcoholics Anonymous, they don't want to admit that they have a problem, they don't really know how to deal with it, and they really just need additional support from professionals, therapists, doctors to really process their shame and help individuals with low sobriety get the tools that they need to deal with their shame. And only 31% of the sample sought additional treatment. So how can we get individuals in Alcoholics Anonymous to seek out more additional help besides just going to meetings? I think that this needs to be promoted within the community, and there just needs to be a bigger emphasis placed on it. So for future research, I think it would be really, really beneficial to focus on individuals who have a year or less of sobriety. There seems to be a lot of good information here on places that we can really help these people, and I think that if we spent more time focusing on 1 year or less of sobriety, and especially women with 1 year or less of sobriety, we would find a lot and we would be able to tailor the treatment models to better serve their needs. And how can we increase treatment seeking among individuals? I think it would be really beneficial to look at how can we get education to women, what happens if we help with childcare and cost of childcare, and how can we educate more women to get into treatment and help themselves. So the take-home message. Overall, individuals with substance use disorders can overcome their shame and receive support to do so from family and friends. Family and friends were very instrumental in this, for all individuals in my study to process their shame and to feel less shameful. And more attention is needed for research for those with less than a year of sobriety. Thank you.
questions for Madison? Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Vanessa. Did you examine or, like, or did past research look at the years that they were, an addict or, as a factor in terms of?
You mean like how long they've been actively using?
Yes, yes, exactly.
I didn't, in all of the research that I looked at, I didn't find much of that. More focused on how long they've been sober since the last time that they've gotten sober. Any other questions? Yeah.
What made you choose this model?
I just have a lot. I mean, addiction is everywhere. I think people like to kind of not think about it and pretend like it's not real, but people with addiction are our mothers, our brothers, our family, our friends. Like, it's everywhere, and I think that it's something that needs to be addressed. I think that these people shouldn't be shunned, and I don't think that they should feel shameful. I think it's something that we should rally around them and help them overcome addiction.
Kind of piggybacking off her question, is it something you want to take further, like in graduate studies, or is this an area of interest for the
Yeah, I currently work at a treatment center with adolescents, and I really, really enjoy it. Addiction goes far beyond just using drugs and how to stop dealing with that. It goes along with a lot of behavioral issues. It goes along with a lot of childhood trauma that hasn't been dealt with, and so people seek out drugs and alcohol as a solution to that. And I don't know if necessarily it's exactly what I want to go into, but I definitely would like to be prepared to deal with any person that has addiction instead of turning them away at the door because I don't really know how to treat it.
questions?
Thank you.
That was great, Madison. Thank you.
Everybody. My name is Morgan Faulkner, and I am testing the effectiveness of a personalized normative feedback intervention to decrease levels of binge drinking, misperceptions of binge drinking norms, and its effectiveness in increasing self-efficacy and knowledge about the negative consequences related to binge drinking. Collegiate binge drinking is a major health concern nationwide. Binge drinking is defined as 4 or more drinks for a female or 5 or more drinks for a male in one sitting. Almost 2/3 of college students reported binge drinking in the past 2 weeks, and 1/4 of college students nationwide reported academic consequences, such as missing classes or a lower grade in a class as a result of binge drinking. One reason for the high levels of collegiate binge drinking is that students enter college with a misperception of drinking norms, which is known as the social norming theory. PNF is a primary prevention program that aims to expose these misperceptions of drinking norms in a live classroom setting. So last year, I, along with other peer health educators, created and implemented a personalized normative feedback intervention on 119 Marymount students that were enrolled in the ID 117 classes last fall of 2014. When asking about their perception of drinking norms, we asked what percentage of students do you think binge drank in the past 2 weeks, and 53% overestimated the actual percentage. And then we asked, have you binge drank in the past 2 weeks, and only 37 reported the binge drinking norms. So in this intervention, the social norming theory was supported because there was a gap between how much people thought their peers were drinking and how many actually were. Besides just looking at the norms, I am looking at the theory of planned behavior and look at attitudes and control. Attitudes are like their negative or positive views of a behavior, and control are like pretty much their self-efficacy level in situations that in peer pressure. And I use this theory because, as Jin said, if you want to change your behavior, you have to change the beliefs about a behavior first. There have been numerous studies that found the PNF intervention effective at the 1, 2, and 6 month follow-up in lowering levels of binge drinking, lower misperceptions of binge drinking norms, and reduction in negative consequences related to binge drinking. And although there are a lot of support, I found one study that found it ineffective after a 6 and 12 month follow-up. So this could be due to that larger gap, or because it was implemented on a computer instead of in a live session. And I found research showing that seeing your peers and seeing the actual results in the live classroom setting more effective than computerized. There are also several studies that use the theory of planned behavior in predicting drinking levels in college students. And in the studies, the theory was supported because beliefs, subjective norms, and self-efficacy were found to be significant predictors of intention to binge drink in college students. And there have been differences found between class standings, with freshman students being a higher risk for engaging in binge drinking. This could be due because they are away from their parents for the first time. They may be experiencing homesickness. They may be having difficulties coping with the stressors involved in college that they're not used to. And this study is important to add to the literature of the effectiveness of the PNF intervention. And also because past literature fails to show any support of this intervention over a 1-year follow-up. And besides just looking at the levels of binge drinking and the misperceptions of binge drinking norms, this study also examines self-efficacy and attitudes towards binge drinking as an effect of the intervention. So my hypotheses in regards to the social norming theory is that I hypothesize that students who attended the intervention will have lower levels of binge drinking and lower misperceptions of binge drinking norms when compared to the students who did not attend. And in accordance with the theory of planned behavior, it is hypothesized that participants who attended the intervention will have higher levels of self-efficacy and will be more knowledgeable about the negative consequences associated with binge drinking than those who did not. And finally, for the freshman class, it is hypothesized that they will have lower levels of self-efficacy and will be less aware of the negative consequences when compared to the later grades. So the participants of this study were 73 female and 20 male Marymount undergraduate students. The sophomores made up the majority of the study, making up 46%. Hispanics were the most represented group with 38.7%, and 21.5% reported attending the intervention last year. And then a couple did not, and some did not remember. So for the materials, the questionnaire included 8 closed-ended questions, 5 statements where you could say your level of agreement with each statement with a 5-point Likert scale, ranging from 1 strongly agree to 5 strongly disagree. And these were used to measure our independent and dependent variables. The independent variables in my study was whether or not the participant attended the intervention, as well as class standing. And for my dependent variables, the levels of binge drinking and the perception of binge drinking norms were adopted from other studies that also used the personalized normative intervention on college students. And in order to measure the students' levels of self-efficacy and their confidence in themselves to be able to say no, I used 2 items, and an example example statement was, I would feel comfortable saying no to a peer if somebody offered me a drink and I did not want to drink. And in order to measure views or attitudes of binge drinking, we asked questions that tested if the students were aware of negative and positive long and short-term consequences of binge drinking. And one of the statements was alcohol abuse affects the student academic performance. Overall, 78.5% of students reported that they had not binge drank in the past 2 weeks. And when it came to misperceptions of drinking norms, 22.6 overestimated. And when it came to measuring self-efficacy, the first one that we did was peer pressure. And as a reminder, the lower grades meant the lower scores meant higher in agreements. So when it came to the levels of peer pressure, it was a fairly neutral agreement and for a very neutral level. And when it was testing the comfort levels of saying no to peer pressure, they somewhat agreed to neutral, leaning towards neutral. And to view our 2 things measuring views or attitudes towards binge drinking, when it came to if binge drinking affected academic performance, they agreed with at a level of 2.5, and if binge drinking was more common amongst freshmen, they somewhat agreed, but it was leaning towards neutral. So when it came to answering my hypothesis according to the social norming theory, it was not supported because there was no significant differences in the levels of binge drinking or the levels of misperception of binge drinking norms in comparing those who attended and those who did not. But when you're looking at the levels of self-efficacy, in gray we have the students who did attend, and in orange we have those who did not. So when a lower mean indicates a higher level of agreement, this is showing that the people who attended felt a higher level of comfort saying no to a peer. And on this side, it shows that those who attended felt less peer pressure than those who did not attend. And then finally, when it came to attitudes and views, those who attended the intervention felt were in higher agreement that binge drinking is more common amongst freshmen. On this side, it was shown that people who attended were more aware about that binge drinking affects academic performance than those who did not attend. And when it came to showing differences between the class standings, in this one first, this is freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors. In here, it shows that the freshman students felt a higher level of peer pressure than the other grades. In this one, it is showing that the sophomores felt less comfortable saying no to a peer. And it's just interesting to note that the sophomore class, which is the class that received the intervention last year, felt the most comfortable saying no to peer pressure. And as well here, the freshman students were less aware that binge drinking affects academic performance than the other classes, and once again, the sophomores were the most aware of those. So summary of my findings was that at Marymount, the prevalence of binge drinking with this sample was low. And, but we were able to show that freshmen were a high-risk population, and we were also able to show that the intervention, we can assume that the intervention had an effect on an increased level of self-efficacy to say no to binge drinking and an increased awareness of negative consequences. There were some limitations to my study. The first would be the small number of participants that reported attending the intervention. There was only about 20 of the 94 participants that said that they attended, but this could be due because the first intervention was a whole school year prior, so students may have transferred, dropped out, or do not remember attending the intervention. And another limitation was that there was no control group at the baseline, so although we were able to compare those who attended and those who did not, we were not able to compare that back to a baseline. And finally, it was hard to run analyses on different confounds related to binge drinking with such a low number of participants reporting binge drinking. And that could be explained by either the fact that Marymount is a dry campus and is a Catholic campus, or because maybe they felt somewhat of a social desirability bias and wanted to look favorable on the survey. And for future studies, this same intervention can be tested its effectiveness on this population, but maybe with a shorter gap instead of a whole school year later. And we can further explore the effects of the intervention on confounds such as self-efficacy and attitudes towards binge drinking. So implications of this study is that even though it did not directly lower levels of binge drinking and misperceptions of binge drinking norms after a 1-year follow-up, we can say that it did support the effectiveness of the intervention in increasing self-efficacy and lower levels of they know more about the negative consequences associated with binge drinking, and this intervention can be used on other universities for other high-risk populations. Thank you.
Questions for Morgan?
Yes. Do you think, because I don't think it was tested for it, that at Marymount, that there would be a difference between results of students living in residence as opposed to maybe students living at home?
Yeah, and I have read research showing that the people living in the dormitory and are around their peers more do have higher levels of peer pressure and therefore higher levels of binge drinking. Yeah, I did find that.
Okay, so as a result of your studies, if you were hired by Marymount next year on the student life team or what would you recommend?
I think that after this intervention was implemented, well, this was done because alcohol-wise, which was cut, and so
Right.
we felt that students needed some education, and knowing that if they wanted to choose not to drink, they weren't alone. And so I think that with these results, and I think that it's important to keep some knowledge in a live setting, and I also think that having it peer-led, because it was me and probably 4 other peer health educators, so we were all certified, we did a training, and I feel like hearing it from your peers, it's less like don't drink, don't do this, it's more like showing them that they're not alone, and showing them, we talked about in the intervention, we also talked about consequences, and we had them give examples of long and short term, and so I think that keeping some kind of peer-led gives it a more like down to the student level. Thank you.
I have a question about the actual intervention that was implemented last year. So did you take the curriculum from something that already existed, or did you all as students develop the topics that you were going to cover and then go follow up that?
Yeah, well, I was in the Health and Wellness Club 2 years back, and so we all were able to attend different peer and health conferences, health and wellness conferences in Washington, D.C., and there we got to see really high-level college universities like Harvard, Brown, and they all got to show their, if they had a really effective intervention, we got to see theirs. So after seeing all those examples, we kind of took the things that we liked, and with the main concept of the social norming theory and just talking about the consequences and self-efficacy, and we just kind of, a little bit of both, we adopted from things that we saw from other universities.
And based on your findings or other people's models, is this something that's only a one-time thing, or do you see this across every school year in terms of that being implemented? You know what I'm
and I was kind of looking, because with the students who, but when it looked at class standings, if like they were aware of different long-term effects and different resources and a couple of things that I measured, the later years did not know as much as the sooner years. So maybe not a full thing like this, because they might think that that's for the freshmen incoming students, but maybe like small
something
reminder.
tailored to the specific grade level or
Yeah, because it is, and other high risk targets were athletes and Greek life, which we don't have, but it could be implemented on like having 2 teams in here or something like that.
I think I really like the way you also had the question about academics in there, because I think a lot of students in prevention programs or alcohol awareness programs, we tend to see a lot of films on, car accidents or overdose or sexual activity that maybe you would not have engaged in, Title IX type things, all of those. But forget you have a quiz in the morning, so how are you going to do on that quiz? And so to have you have pulled in the question on academics, I think, is really, really critical, because I think that's almost the byproduct. The others are almost these are really awful things that are going to happen. Meanwhile, you're going to get dismissed because you aren't going to, so I'm glad you pulled that in.
And a lot of people do use the fear tactic, and this is another thing that we learned in these conferences that were funded by Marymount, and we saw that when students hear car crashes, this, and all these alcohol poisoning, they don't, it's not going to happen to me. That's the mindset that they have. So they just kind of disregard in one ear out the other. When they're talking about car crashes, I've never, you know what I mean? I've never been in a car accident, but kind of talking about we had a thing where we wrote down, and it was able to show that everything that was good about alcohol were all short term, and everything bad about alcohol were long term, just to kind of get them thinking about the long term. Like the short term is you might be able to get inhibitions and you might be more social or something, but then you don't think about the long term. So just different things to get them thinking about it and talking about it is really important.
Yeah, point to cover.
Thank you.
Other questions for Morgan? Cool, that was beautiful.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to my capstone today. My name is Shailene Smith, and the title of my capstone project is Memory for Socially Gendered Objects. So, what is the socialization of gender? Gender socialization is the process by which males and females are informed about the norms and behaviors associated with their sex. It's the tendency for boys and girls to be socialized differently. Society expects different attitudes and behaviors from both boys and girls. A gender role is a set of behaviors, attitudes, and personality characteristics expected and encouraged of a person based on their sex. An example of the influence that can unconsciously be placed on boys and girls is different toys and games that parents select. They're often unconsciously intended to socialize them into their future role. For example, little girls are typically given dolls and little boys are typically given action figures. So, factors in gender differences. The cognitive development theory of gender typing has three subtopics of gender identity, gender stability, and gender consistency. The cognitive development theory is explained children categorizing themselves as either male or females, while the gender schema theory talks about how children develop a naive mental schema that help them organize their expectations in a way that they will know how to interpret new information, and this can also influence their identity later on in life. So, it's no secret that both males and females are very different, even more so to what the naked eye can see. Research reveals differences between both male and female brains. Some past research has even found that women excel in verbal episodic memory tasks like memorizing words, objects, or pictures, or even everyday events, as to where men outperform women in remembering symbolic, non-linguistic information or visual spatial processing. And the reason I chose to study this is because over summer I took a course and we read an article that was done in Australia. The study was done in Australia by the author Knapp, and she examined Central Australian children, both Aboriginal and European children, focusing on visual memory of spatial displays. She gave each of the participants two different tests, one that had objects that were typically found in industrialized areas, like bolts, screws, cigarettes, stuff that you would see around the city floors, and also more nature objects, so rocks, twigs, and such. And she studied whether Aboriginal children could memorize and replicate what she had given them, as well as the European children. And it was found that the more familiar the child was with that object or knew what it was, they were more likely to remember it. So I was like, why not apply it to gender? And that's why I got my study. So leads me to my hypothesis, which was, it was predicted that males would score higher on the memory test for male items and females would recall more female items. My participants for this study were Marymount, California University students with an age range of 18 to 28. They were selected by random sampling. And my gender breakdown, I had 10 males participate and 17 females participate, which brought my whole sample total to 27. The ethnicity breakdown of participants is as shown on this graph. The majority of participants identified as either being Hispanic or Spanish, while the second largest group was Caucasian or European descent. The materials that were used for my study, everyone was given a consent form. There were 2 memory tests, both male and female, and I will later explain those in the next slide. And there was a 5 questionnaire survey given, as well as a debriefing handout when participants were done with all materials. So these are the memory testing materials. This is what both gendered tests look like. There are 20 stereotypical socially gendered objects that each participant had to memorize. So the male memory test shows stereotypical like games, tools, cars, stuff like that, while the female memory test showed more makeup, jewelry, fashion, and such. And they were also given a blank testing sheet as well as cutouts of the original objects that were on the sheets previously shown when testing came for them to replicate what they had originally saw. So the procedure for my study, I met one-on-one with each participant in a quiet setting so that they could better focus on memory recall. Before doing anything, participants were given a consent form and they were told the guidelines of the experiment. The consent form basically just stated that they had the right to withdraw any time if they felt uncomfortable or didn't want to continue. Then they were given the memory test. They were either given the male or the female test. I tried to have variance within the order they were given, so I could also test that later. They were also given a survey. It was a 5-questionnaire survey. The first 3 questions were just demographic questions of age, gender, and ethnicity, while the last 2 questions got more of the participants' perception of how they did on the study. So those questions read, overall, I found the socially gendered male object memory test to be either a very easy, somewhat difficult, or very difficult. So they had a 4-point Likert scale. And there was also a question in regards to the female object memory test and how they felt that they performed on that test. Once participants finished, they were given an ID number, whether they took the male or female test first and whether they were male or female, and the number of participant that they were. Everything was anonymous. And after completing all of that, they gave me their survey and then I went over a debriefing handout with them. It had information for researchers if they had any questions later on about the experiment or wanted to talk about it or anything like that. So, did gender of objects matter overall? No statistical difference was found for the whole sample on male test versus the female test. So as you can see here, there was really no variation in how they performed overall as a whole sample when focusing on the gender of the actual objects. So did order matter overall? It was found that there was no statistical difference for the whole sample on the first or the second test. So as you can see too, again, within this graph, there's no real variance within the order. This is represented here, the first test and then the second test, and this is their mean score out of 20 of how they did. Overall scores, it was found that no gender difference on the memory test when comparing female objects to male objects was found. As you can see, the p-value shows that there's no statistical significance. Here on the chart, it explains the male score in red and the female score in orange for the male test and then for the female test. So this is just the gender differences for the whole sample overall. And then there's no gender difference in order. Looking at both genders independently, order of the test did not matter. Once again, if you look at this graph, the first test is going to be represented in red, while the orange is representative of the second test. And this is the males and this is the females. So the order of the test really didn't show any variance, or one group didn't outperform any other group. Participants' perception. This is the questions that I had mentioned earlier of this, that were on my survey. And as you can see here, when you break it down by gender, people didn't really think that they did better on one test over the other. There was no statistical significance within these results too of how the participants felt that they did. So in summary, my hypothesis was not supported and the data was not statistically significant. It was found that for my study, that because of the no statistical difference when looking at gender and their ability to recall the different socially gendered objects, gender didn't really matter, and the order that the test was given was found to not matter either. So some limitations with my study, I found that the procedure overall proved to kind of reduce my sample size. Having a small sample size made it difficult to have statistically significant results. And because of the way the study was set up, I found it to be difficult to get participants to want to actually participate. And then the time that it took to complete each study or each memory test, as well as the color of the objects, could have been a limitation. One study showed that the color of a coloring book presented influence a child's choice of book or with the socially gendered image that was on it. And a few participants had mentioned that they felt that the female test was more difficult because majority of the objects were pink, and there was more variance within colors for the male test, although that didn't really transfer over into the participant perceptions of results. So that could be something that kind of influenced my overall findings. And then future studies and implications. For my study in particular, I didn't really focus on sexual orientation of participants, so it would be interesting later on in future studies if sexual orientation of the participants was known, if that would affect them in any way. And then other studies have found differences between memories and sexes, although my study did not. And so as I had mentioned earlier, it's known that men do better on visual spatial memory. So some implications of this knowledge would be in the education system. For study habits, for example, if males do better on visual spatial memory, then implementing this within their study habits could be more beneficial to them overall, that they could better memorize information. And not only studying, but also teachers incorporating this knowledge into their lesson plans. If teachers can cater to the needs of students better when knowing how they can excel in more so in one area than another, that could also be beneficial to the students when it comes to testing and recall of information that was previously learned in the classroom. And yeah, so those are some implications of the study. Thank you for your time. Is there any questions? Yes.
So when looking at the gender of the participants, was that based off their biological sex or their perceived gender expression, or how male or female they felt?
The question said gender, male or female, so however they wanted to identify is how they selected. It was either male or female, and from that, that's what I got. So just how they identified majority.
Yes, finding what you found, have you shared this information with any of your professors to see if they would change their teaching style to accommodate, and also have any of them had any opinions on that?
I have not. I've shared this information with my professor, Lynn. And we talked about the education and applying it with teachers, so that's kind of the only thing I've done so far with it, but I mean, that would be interesting
It's
too.
teacher,
Yeah,
it's
teacher. Yeah. Any more questions? Comments?
Would this be a study that you would like to expand or dig deeper into? Perhaps?
Yeah, I personally feel that if I had a bigger sample population, my results would have been different. Because there's other studies that did something similar to what I did, and they got statistically significant results and had like their hypothesis supported and stuff. So I feel like if it was ran again with more participants, there could be a difference in results. And like I had mentioned with the other limitations of colors of objects too, if that were changed, maybe that would change the results as well.
This is just like hypothetical, but how would you say, or if when you when you were doing your looking into past literature, was there any of the other issues that said when they dealt with students that were colorblind, so they couldn't associate like colors and stuff?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't recall that being a thing, or if they even asked them in the surveys mentioned, because I looked at a couple different studies, some focused on children and some focused on adults, and I'll have to look into that. Yeah, I didn't think of that. Good question. Yes.
Do you think that going on, if you were to become a teacher or professor, that this was something that will come up and that you will use and take into consideration?
Definitely. I want to be an elementary school teacher, so I would prefer to be a third grade teacher, and knowing what I know now, I could definitely apply it into the classroom and how like we would learn different, like helping them study and stuff for tests, and yeah, it's definitely applicable.